Forests, with their towering trees and endless shadows, have always been places of mystery and intrigue. Beneath the dense canopy, where sunlight barely filters through, secrets linger and stories unfold. Some beautiful, others utterly terrifying. Tonight, I'm going to share with you 4 disturbing tales of encounters in forests that will make you think twice before wandering too far from the beaten path. These are stories of fear, survival, and the unknown, told in the words of those who lived through them or claim to. Sit back, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself, because these stories are not for the faint of heart. Welcome to Creep. It happened during a camping trip with my friends in the Pacific Northwest. The forest there is dense, beautiful, and hauntingly quiet at night. We had picked a remote spot deep in the woods, miles away from civilization, to escape the distractions of everyday life. The first day was uneventful. We set up our tents, built a fire, and spent the evening sharing stories and roasting marshmallows under a canopy of stars. It was everything we had hoped for. The second night, however, was different. Around midnight, we heard footsteps outside our tents, slow, deliberate steps that circled our camp. My first thought was that it was a deer or maybe a bear, but when I peeked outside, I saw nothing. The footsteps continued for hours, moving around us but never coming into view. At dawn, we decided to pack up and leave. As we were taking down our tents, one of my friends froze, pointing toward a clearing just beyond the tree line. Standing there was a man, tall, pale, and barefoot, wearing what looked like old, tattered clothes. His head was slightly tilted, and his expression was blank, almost as if he wasn't really seeing us. We called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed directly at us. That was enough for us. We grabbed what we could and bolted for the trailhead. When I glanced back, he was still there, standing in the same spot, watching us leave. Even now, I don't know who or what we saw that day. I grew up near a forest in upstate New York, a place I often explored as a kid. By the time I was in high school, I knew those woods like the back of my hand. But one evening, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew. It was autumn, and the days were getting shorter. I had gone out for a walk to clear my head after an argument with my parents. The trail I followed was one I'd walked 100 times before, winding through thick clusters of oak and maple trees. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I had stayed out too late and decided to head back. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a single voice, but many, overlapping in an eerie, unintelligible murmur. I froze, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like the trees themselves were speaking. I picked up my pace, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the whispers followed me, growing louder with each step. I could swear they were saying my name. Then, out of nowhere, I tripped over something and fell face first into the dirt. When I looked back to see what had tripped me, I saw a gnarled tree root sticking out of the ground. Only, it wasn't a root. It was a hand. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I was out of the woods and back on my street. My parents didn't believe me, of course. They said I must have imagined it in the dark, that it was just a shadow. But I know what I saw, and sometimes on quiet nights, I can still hear those whispers if I stand too close to the edge of the forest. This happened when I was out hiking alone in the Appalachian Mountains. I love hiking, especially alone. It's peaceful, quiet, a way to clear my mind. But this trip was different. It was early fall, the air crisp with the smell of decaying leaves, and I decided to take a new trail that ran deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone before. For hours, I walked without seeing anyone. It was just me and the trees. As the sun began to set, I started looking for a good spot to camp for the night, and that's when I felt it, eyes on me. It was subtle at first, a slight chill in the air, a rustling in the trees. But then it got harder to ignore. My instincts were telling me I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there. I looked around, but I saw nothing. No other hikers, no animals, just the forest eerily still. I set up camp, trying to brush off the unease. But that night, as I sat around the fire, the feeling grew stronger. The sound of footsteps came from the edge of my camp, too quiet to be a deer, too deliberate to be the wind. I stood up, shining my flashlight in the direction of the noise. Nothing. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then resumed. Slow, methodical. They were getting closer. My heart began to race. I grabbed my backpack, my gear, and bolted for the trail. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest ranger station, where I collapsed from exhaustion. The park rangers told me no one had been out on that trail for days, and they didn't see any signs of wildlife nearby either. I was alone, or so they said. I don't know who or what was tracking me that night, but I've never gone hiking alone in those woods again. Every time I think back on it, I can still hear those footsteps in the dark, getting closer and closer, but never quite there. This is the most unsettling story I have, and it's one that I've only shared with a few people. It happened in 2014 when I was visiting a small town in Northern California. The town was surrounded by dense forest, and I'd been told by the locals that there were some beautiful hiking trails nearby. But what they didn't tell me was what else lurked in those woods. I had planned on spending the day hiking, taking photos of the landscape, and just soaking in the tranquility. I set off early in the morning, leaving the small cabin I'd rented, and heading toward the forest. The path was narrow, surrounded by towering redwoods and thick ferns. The sun barely pierced the canopy, and the deeper I went, the darker it seemed to get. By mid-afternoon, I had reached a small clearing, a peaceful spot by a creek. I sat down by the water to have a snack, enjoying the stillness. But that's when I noticed something strange. There was an old, weathered stone structure partially hidden by vines. At first, I thought it was just a piece of some forgotten stone wall, perhaps from an old homestead or something left behind by the indigenous people. But when I got closer, I realized it was a tomb, a small, crudely constructed mausoleum with a rusted iron door that looked like it hadn't been opened in centuries. There was a plaque above the door, but the inscription had long been worn away, the letters barely legible. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave right then, but something kept me rooted to the spot. It was like the forest was holding me there, drawing me closer to the tomb. My curiosity got the best of me, and I slowly pushed the door open. Inside was pitch black, even with my flashlight. I stepped in and immediately felt the temperature drop. It was unnaturally cold, a sharp contrast to the warm air outside. As I looked around, I could make out the faintest outlines of what seemed to be old, crumbled bones scattered across the floor. But it wasn't just bones. There were remnants of clothing, pieces of old, tattered fabric. And then I saw something that made my stomach twist. A child's shoe, small, dirt-covered, and it looked new. I don't know why I did it, but I bent down to pick it up. The moment my fingers touched the shoe, I heard a loud crash from behind me, like something heavy falling to the ground. My heart nearly stopped. I turned, flashlight trembling in my hand, and there, standing at the entrance, was a figure, a man, or something that looked like a man. But his features were twisted and distorted, like his face had been stretched and pulled unnaturally. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me. I backed away slowly, terrified, but I didn't turn around to run. I didn't dare take my eyes off of him. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stepped aside, vanishing back into the trees. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran back to the trail, not stopping until I reached the town. I never spoke about that day until now. The forest has secrets. Secrets that are better left buried, forgotten, and undisturbed. And some things, once seen, never leave you. Thank you for sticking around until the end of tonight's stories. I hope you're feeling just a little bit creeped out, because that's exactly what we're here for. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss another chilling tale. Remember, the world is full of things that go bump in the night, and some stories are better left untold. Until now, stay safe, keep the lights on, and always trust your instincts when you feel like something's not quite right. Until next time, this is Creep signing off. Keep your distance from the dark corners, and remember, some stories aren't just stories, they're warnings.